I grew up in a household where everything seemed to revolve around my older brother. He was the one everyone talked about, the one who could do no wrong. He was the golden child of the family, the one with perfect grades, the star athlete, and the one who effortlessly made friends with everyone he met. My parents couldn't stop talking about how proud they were of him, and I couldn't help but feel like I was just invisible. Sure, I had my own achievements, but they were always overshadowed by his. It felt like there was a spotlight on him, and I was left in the shadows, struggling to figure out where I fit in. From a young age, I knew that my brother was destined for greatness in their eyes. He was the one who was always expected to succeed, who everyone believed would go on to do amazing things. And while I tried my best to do well in school, pursue my interests, and build my own life, nothing ever seemed to compare to the praise he received. It wasn't that I hated him for it. I loved him, actually. But I couldn't ignore the fact that the world seemed to think that my accomplishments were just secondary, that whatever I did would never measure up to his achievements. At family gatherings, it was always the same. People would ask him about his latest accomplishments, his sports victories, his upcoming plans for college, and then when they turned to me, the conversation would quickly shift to something else. My grades were good enough, but they were never as good as his. My accomplishments were nice, but they always seemed to be in the background. It was like I was a footnote in a story that was already being written about him. But what really stung was when my parents would talk about his future. It was like they had already mapped out his life, already set him on a course to succeed, and for me, well, I was still figuring things out. It felt like I was walking through life in his shadow, constantly trying to catch up, but never quite getting there. I started to feel like maybe I wasn't enough, like maybe I didn't have the same potential. If I couldn't be as great as my brother, then what was I even doing? That feeling of being overlooked became my reality. I tried to be the good daughter, the one who didn't make waves or ask for attention, but inside I was torn. I knew I had dreams, big ones, but they felt small compared to the dreams everyone had for my brother. He was going to be a doctor, a lawyer, something prestigious. And me? I was still trying to figure out what I wanted, still struggling to define myself in a way that felt meaningful. It wasn't long before I realized that if I didn't do something to change things, I would remain stuck in the same place forever, always living in his shadow. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for anyone to notice me or my potential. I was going to take matters into my own hands. I knew that I had to stop comparing myself to him. I had to find my own path, even if it meant stepping out of my comfort zone. It wasn't about competing with my brother anymore. It was about figuring out what made me happy and what I could do to carve out a space for myself in this world. I started looking into different opportunities, exploring things that sparked my curiosity. It wasn't easy. The more I researched, the more I realized that success wasn't going to come from simply following the traditional path. I had to think outside the box, to challenge myself in ways I had never done before. It wasn't just about getting the recognition or approval of others. It was about building something for myself, creating something that reflected who I really was. I began to dive deep into the things I loved, the passions that had always been there but were buried beneath years of self-doubt and fear. I looked at the business world, the tech industry, creative ventures, whatever I felt could align with my own values and dreams. I knew that it was going to take hard work, sacrifice, and persistence, but more than anything, I had to believe in myself even when no one else did. I had to trust that I could build something real, something powerful, even if it meant taking a different route than everyone expected. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned if I was making the right choice. I felt the weight of my family's expectations bearing down on me. They loved me, but there was always this unspoken belief that my brother would be the one to carry on the family legacy. But I couldn't let that hold me back. I had to break free from this cycle of comparison and start living for me, not for the approval of anyone else. One night, after a particularly discouraging conversation with my parents, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let their doubts or the weight of their expectations define me. I was going to take a risk, one that I had been too afraid to take before. I would chase my own dreams, even if they seemed unrealistic to others. I was ready to step out from behind my brother's shadow and start building something that was entirely mine. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew that, but I was ready for the challenge. I started putting in the work. Late nights researching, building connections, figuring out how to turn my ideas into something tangible. Every step was a struggle, but with each obstacle, I grew more determined. The feeling of being overlooked, of always being second to my brother, began to fade away as I focused on my own path. I wasn't competing with him anymore. I was competing with myself, pushing myself to reach new heights to be the best version of me. And so the journey began. Every day I took one more step forward. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that if I kept pushing, if I kept believing, I would eventually get to where I wanted to be. It was no longer about living in someone else's shadow. It was about creating my own story. It was one of those moments when you realize you either keep going down the same safe, predictable path or take a risk that could change everything. I'd been living in my brother's shadow for so long that it had started to feel like that was my role in life, the quiet one, the one who followed. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I couldn't keep going down that road. I was suffocating in the expectations of others, constantly comparing myself to someone who seemed to have it all figured out. I had tried to prove myself in the past, but nothing ever seemed to be enough. One evening, I was sitting alone in my room, reflecting on the way things had been going. My brother's success, his life, it was as though the entire family was rooting for him to win, and I was just the background character. I was tired of waiting for a moment that would never come, tired of hoping someone would finally notice my potential. It was clear to me now, if I was ever going to break free from this feeling of being second best, I had to take matters into my own hands. I needed to make a choice, and I needed to make it fast. The decision wasn't easy. It would have been so much simpler to just follow the comfortable, well-trodden path. To go to school, get a safe job, and settle for a life that was good enough, but not necessarily mine. Everyone around me, including my family, expected me to follow that same route, to take the easy way out. But something inside me was screaming, telling me that if I didn't at least try, I would never know what I was truly capable of. I didn't want to live with the regret of never taking the risk, of always wondering what if. I started researching, diving into areas that fascinated me. I looked at business opportunities, the startup world, and creative ventures that aligned with my interests. There were so many different directions I could take, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed to create something from the ground up, something that felt true to me, something that had the potential to change my life. The first step was terrifying. It was a leap into the unknown, and there were moments when I doubted my abilities. I felt the weight of expectations pressing down on me, both from my family and from myself. What if I failed? What if it all crumbled and I was left with nothing but disappointment? But then I reminded myself that this was my chance to prove to myself and to the world that I could do this. I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I had already spent too much time in my brother's shadow. Now was the time to step into my own light. I began making small but significant decisions every day that brought me closer to my goal. I reached out to people who could help guide me, people who had experience in the areas I wanted to explore. I enrolled in online courses to learn new skills, and I spent hours reading articles, listening to podcasts, and watching interviews with entrepreneurs who had started from scratch and made it big. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't fast, but with every piece of knowledge I gained, I felt more equipped to take on the challenge. At the same time, I started to look for a way to fund my dream. I had no family fortune to fall back on, no investors waiting in the wings to back me up. I didn't have the luxury of taking huge risks without consequences. It was a grind. I worked part-time jobs, saved every penny I could, and started looking for ways to build my business on a shoestring budget. It was hard. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when I thought, maybe this isn't for me after all. But I kept pushing through those doubts. I knew I couldn't turn back now. During this time, I also had to face the uncomfortable truth that I wasn't going to get the support I'd hoped for from my family. My parents were skeptical, especially when they saw how much time I was devoting to something that didn't fit into their idea of a safe future. And my brother? He didn't take me seriously at first. He couldn't understand why I wasn't just following the same path he had taken. After all, he was the one who had it all figured out. Why couldn't I just be content with what I had, with the comfort and security that came from taking the easy route? But I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for freedom, the freedom to build something of my own, something that felt authentic to who I was. I realized that this journey wasn't just about proving myself to my family or my brother. It was about proving something to myself. It was about showing myself that I was capable of creating my own future, no matter how daunting it seemed. Every time I faced a challenge, I learned something new about myself, my strength, my determination, and my resilience. There were days when I questioned everything. I wondered if I was doing the right thing, if this was all a huge mistake. But every time I thought about quitting, I reminded myself of why I started in the first place. I couldn't stand the thought of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I couldn't let fear or doubt hold me back anymore. Eventually, my hard work started to pay off. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't easy, but with each step forward, I got closer to my dream. Slowly, I started to see the results of my labor, small wins that proved I was on the right path. And then, one day, I got an opportunity that I had worked so hard for. I secured a deal, a real one, the kind of deal that could take my business to the next level. It was the kind of moment I had been waiting for, the validation that all my hard work had been worth it. It was the moment I knew that I had finally done it. I had taken the risk, stepped out of my comfort zone, and created something that was entirely my own. As I prepared to share this news with my family, I felt a mix of emotions. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but there was also a sense of anticipation. How would they react? Would they be proud of me, or would they brush it off as just another one of my wild ideas? I didn't know for sure, but one thing was certain. I had taken control of my life, and I had built something that was truly mine. The day I finally returned home, I was filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I had spent months building something that I was proud of, something that represented everything I had worked for, all the dreams I had dared to pursue. But at the same time, I knew that walking into my family's home meant I was about to face the very people who had always placed their hopes and expectations on my brother's shoulders, while mine had often been overlooked. It wasn't that I didn't love my family, I did deeply, but there was always this underlying tension between us, one that came from the years of comparison. The truth was, I never truly felt like I belonged in their world. They loved me, but they also seemed to expect me to fit into a mold that I never could. I wasn't my brother, I didn't have the same personality or the same career ambitions, but for so long I tried to convince myself that if I just played by their rules, I could make them proud. In the back of my mind, I held on to the hope that one day they would recognize my efforts. But it never happened. As I walked up the front steps of our house, I could feel the weight of everything I had accomplished. It was a heavy feeling, a mixture of pride and vulnerability. I wasn't sure how my parents would react or if they would even see the value in what I had achieved, but in my heart, I knew that I had done it for me, not for them. This was my journey, and no matter what happened now, I had carved out my own path. I rang the doorbell and waited, feeling a flutter in my chest. When the door opened, I saw the surprise in my mom's eyes, followed by a warm smile. She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her love, though it was clear she was caught off guard by my unexpected visit. But I also saw the curiosity in her gaze, as if she was trying to figure out why I was there and what had changed. After exchanging pleasantries, my dad joined us, his usual air of confidence present. He looked at me, then at my brother, who was sitting across the room, half smiling in that way he always did when he knew he had the upper hand. I had to fight the urge to cringe. But I refused to let the old feelings of inferiority take over. I was no longer the person I had been when I left. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my brother, diminish it. We sat down at the dining table, and the conversation quickly turned to what I had been up to. My brother, in his usual fashion, began talking about his latest accomplishments, as if trying to take the spotlight, as if my visit was nothing more than an interruption to his story. He spoke about his recent promotion at work, the awards he had won, and all the things that made him look so successful in their eyes. I listened quietly, trying not to let my old insecurities bubble up, but then something shifted in me. I realized that my brother's life, while impressive, was no longer the benchmark for my own. I didn't need to compete with him. I wasn't in his race, and he wasn't in mine. I had my own story to tell, one that was uniquely mine, and it was time for me to share it. I took a deep breath, gathered my thoughts, and began speaking. It was at first a little awkward, the words not coming as smoothly as I had hoped, but I pushed through. I started by telling them about my journey, the months I had spent researching, learning, and building my business from the ground up. I explained the risks I had taken, the sacrifices I had made, and the times when I almost gave up but didn't. I spoke with passion because I knew that this was the moment I had been working toward, and I wasn't going to hold back. I told them about the deal I had secured, how it was a game changer for my business, and how it was finally starting to come together. I described the satisfaction I felt, not from the success itself, but from knowing that I had taken a leap of faith and made it work. This wasn't about getting their approval, but about standing tall in front of them and saying, Look at what I've done. This is my success, my journey, and I am proud of it. There was a silence after I finished speaking, a long pause that made me question if I had said too much, but then my dad spoke up. His voice was calm, but I could hear a hint of surprise in his tone. He acknowledged the hard work and effort I had put into everything I had done, and he said something that I didn't expect. "You've come a long way, Sophie. I'm proud of you." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough to make my heart swell with pride. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly been seen, not as a comparison to my brother, but as myself. My mom, too, expressed her pride, but there was a noticeable hesitation in her voice. She had always been supportive, but I could sense the concern she still had for me. She wanted to make sure I was making the right choices, that I wasn't putting all my eggs in one basket, but as I listened to her concerns, I realized something important. She didn't understand my journey, but that didn't make it any less valid. I wasn't doing this for anyone else, I was doing it for me, and that was enough. My brother, on the other hand, was a different story. He was quiet for a while, watching me carefully as if trying to decide how to respond. I could see the subtle shift in his attitude, the way his confidence wavered just a little. He had always been the golden child, the one who was expected to succeed, but now I had come back with something that demanded recognition. It was as if I had taken the prize from under his nose, and he wasn't sure how to react to that. Eventually he smiled, but it was a tight smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, I guess we both have our things now," he said, his tone almost begrudging. I couldn't help but feel a rush of triumph in that moment. It wasn't about beating him, but about proving that I had my own worth, that I could accomplish something significant on my own. It wasn't about his success or mine. It was about both of us having our place, both of us being recognized for who we truly were. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. I had done it. I had stepped into my own light, and I had found my place in the world. The approval of my family, especially my brother, wasn't something I needed anymore. I had proven to myself that I could stand tall, and that was all that truly mattered. It was a moment of quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops, but rather felt deeply within. I had finally come into my own. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. It was almost surreal to think that just a few months ago, I had been the one struggling, feeling small in my brother's shadow, trying to fit into a life that wasn't mine. Now, I had stepped into my own, carved out a space where I could shine on my own terms. It wasn't just the success I had achieved that made me feel different. It was the sense of peace that came with knowing I had made the right choice for myself. My business continued to grow, albeit slowly at first. The deal I had secured opened doors that I hadn't even imagined were possible. As I navigated the complexities of entrepreneurship, I found myself learning constantly, each challenge becoming an opportunity to grow and refine my approach. I knew I still had a long way to go, but every small win felt like a victory. More than that, I was starting to feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The work I was doing was meaningful to me. It wasn't just a job or a way to prove myself, it was my passion, my purpose, and that made all the difference. But as my business grew, so did my sense of responsibility. The more I accomplished, the more I realized that I couldn't afford to rest on my laurels. I had to keep pushing forward, learning from my mistakes, and constantly improving. At the same time, I had to find a way to balance my ambition with my personal life. I had always been the type of person who put everything into my work, sometimes at the expense of other areas of my life. But now, with a clearer sense of what I truly wanted, I knew that I had to find a way to build a life that was both successful and fulfilling. One of the biggest challenges I faced during this time was managing my relationship with my family. Though they had shown pride in what I had accomplished, I could tell that my success was still a point of tension. My brother, in particular, had a hard time accepting that I had found my own path. It wasn't that he was actively trying to undermine me. It was more that he had always been the golden child, the one everyone expected to succeed, and he was struggling with the idea that I had created my own space, one that was independent of him. There were subtle shifts in the dynamic between us. At family gatherings, I could feel the unspoken competition in the air. I knew that my brother was trying to maintain his position as the favorite, but there was a quiet strength in me now that wasn't there before. I wasn't trying to take his place, and I wasn't looking for his approval anymore. I had proven my worth to myself, and that was enough, but it was clear that he wasn't ready to let go of the idea that he was the one who deserved all the recognition. I didn't know how to make him see that there was room for both of us to succeed in our own ways, but I had to remind myself that his journey was his own, just as mine was mine. As I continued to navigate these shifting family dynamics, I also found myself dealing with an internal conflict. For so long, I had been driven by the need to prove myself to others, to show that I was capable, that I was worthy. But now that I had achieved success, I had to ask myself, what was the next step? Was it enough to simply win in the eyes of my family, or was there something deeper I needed to strive for? I began to understand that the external recognition, whether from my family, friends, or even society, was never going to be enough. No matter how much I achieved, there would always be someone else to compare myself to, someone else to measure my success against. What I truly needed was to find inner peace, to be content with who I was, regardless of external validation. I'd spent so many years chasing after approval, seeking to be seen and appreciated by others, but now I realized that the most important approval came from within. This realization didn't come easily. I still struggled with doubts and insecurities, especially when I was faced with challenges that seemed insurmountable. There were moments when I questioned whether I was truly capable of handling the responsibilities I had taken on, but in those moments I reminded myself of everything I had already accomplished. I had built something from nothing, I had taken a risk and it had paid off, and more than that, I had proven to myself that I was worthy of success not because anyone else said so, but because I believed in my own potential. The next big shift came when I began to expand my business. I had started small, doing everything myself, but now it was time to hire people, to delegate responsibilities, and to build a team. This was a whole new challenge, one that required me to step out of my comfort zone even further. I had always been independent, doing everything on my own, but now I had to trust others to help carry the load. It was a humbling experience, and at times I felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. But I also knew that this was part of the journey. Building a business wasn't just about achieving success, it was about creating something that could grow and thrive long-term, something that would continue to make an impact even after I had moved on to the next phase of my life. As I began to hire people, I found that the process was more difficult than I had anticipated. It wasn't just about finding the right skills, it was about finding people who shared my values and vision. I realized that building a team wasn't just about filling positions, it was about creating a culture, a place where people could thrive and grow together. It was about leadership, and that was something I had to learn and continue learning. Training every day. I had to learn to be patient, to trust others, and to be willing to admit when I didn't have all the answers. But I also learned the importance of listening, of valuing the contributions of others, and of building relationships based on mutual respect. Over time, my business continued to grow, and so did my sense of fulfillment. I had proven to myself that I could build something meaningful, something that reflected who I was. But more than that, I had learned to trust myself, to trust the process, and to embrace the idea that success wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey. Each day was a new opportunity to grow, to learn, and to make a difference. Looking back on everything I had accomplished, I realized that the greatest reward wasn't the financial success, the recognition, or even the validation from my family. The greatest reward was the person I had become. I had stepped out of the shadows and into my own light. I had created a life that was mine, one that reflected my values, my passions, and my dreams. And that, I knew, was just the beginning. The journey was far from over, but now I had the courage to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had already proven to myself that I could handle it.